Hi everyone, welcome to week 4 of Adult Learning. I'm Beth McDonald and today we'll be exploring some adult learning theories and models. Our objectives today are to define learning and understand the unique nature of adult learning, understand and identify the types of learning, and understand and evaluate traditional learning theories. So to start, let's define learning. The definition of learning has evolved over time. Thousands of years ago, Aristotle defined knowing as a sensory experience, while Plato felt that introspection was important to knowing. Confucius felt that learning is a journey to becoming fully human. And a few thousand years later, in the late 19th century, psychologists in Europe and North America defined learning as a change in behavior. The definition has continued to evolve over the past century, and for our purposes, we'll use the definition outlined in our textbook, which says that learning is a process and an outcome, and that learning can be cognitive, as gaining knowledge, psychomotor, related to physical skill, or affective, involving emotions or attitudes. Now that we know the types of learning, let's talk a little about why we engage in learning. Our lives are constantly changing, and as Miriam and Birama said in Adult Learning, we have to learn in order to effectively communicate with others, to deal with personal or family problems, to conduct our work, and to build our communities, all of which require us to learn new information, new procedures, and new technology. Factors that may impact learning include globalization and the way knowledge is shared or transferred across the world, the knowledge society, where information or skills may be concentrated because of access to education or jobs. Also, the need for knowledge as technology and careers evolve. That evolving technology, which creates a need to learn but also changes the way we learn. For example, moving learning from the classroom to an online program such as this one. And then changing demographics, aging populations, social differences in who is educated or who has access to education, and the movement of people across borders can influence the need for learning and the methods by which learning is engaged. As we learned in week 2, there may be distinct differences in the way adults learn versus the way children learn. For adult learners, basic factors to consider are that adults often have multiple competing priorities, adults have more experience and learn by applying that knowledge or theories to their experience or the experience of others. And adults have a variety of motivations to learn, which could include career growth, but it could also include having fun, like taking a cooking class or an art class. So now that we know who is learning and why, let's talk about the learning theories. Today we'll explore 5 traditional theories: behaviorism, humanism, cognitivism, social cognitive theory, and constructivism. Our first theory, behaviorism, starts with a dog. You may remember we're learning about Pavlov's dog experiment, where Pavlov would ring a bell and present the dog with food until the dog associated the ringing of the bell with being fed. This experiment was the precursor to the theory of behaviorism. Behaviorists believe that learning is defined by overt changes in behavior, and that changes in behavior are a response to stimuli in the environment. For behaviorists, stimuli and reinforcement are important. If a behavior change is to be maintained, the reaction to the stimuli must be reinforced. An example of this would be praising a child when they say thank you after receiving a gift. We see behaviorism in adult education in classes that have competency-based curriculums with observable outcomes, like a course on CPR or vocation education. Critics of behaviorism argue that the learning is too focused on the how of the tasks, and it doesn't do enough to engage the learner in the why of how the learning fits into their social context. On the opposite end of the spectrum is humanism, which focuses on the development of the whole person. Humanistic psychologists include Maslow, who you probably recall for his hierarchy of needs, which depicts human motivations starting from the basic need for safety and sustenance up to self-actualization through fulfillment and reaching one's own potential. This learning theory encourages self-directed learning with the teacher as a facilitator. Humanistic learning theory has a large impact on adult learning theory. It's from this school of thought that we get andragogy, self-directed learning, and transformative learning. Examples of this include elements of what we're engaging in with the andragogy and transformative learning with the OLL program. Also, the collaborative inquiry model that we read about in this week's reading would fall into this theory. The collaborative inquiry model involves researchers acting as peers, developing questions based on their own experience and understanding, where each member can explore the question through their own experience, and every member is equal in their ability to address the question. Critics of the humanistic model argue that not all learning can be self-directed. For example, learning to drive has a specific standard and a specific objective. Also, critics argue that learning is too focused on the learner, and it may neglect the social context in which the learner exists. We'll explore social context a little later. Another theory that contrasts with behaviorism is cognitivism. Cognitivism focuses on learning as a mental process where the brain is processing information. This model focuses on insight, problem solving, and memory and the brain. Cognitive structures are important in this model. One classic model is Piaget's four-stage model for cognitive development, in which humans move from the infant stage of responding to stimuli to the adolescent adult stage, where they can understand abstract thinking. Memory is important in cognitive theory, as processing is dependent on either sensory, short-term, or long-term memory. Today we see cognitivists learning through Gagne's instructional design theory, which involves learning outcomes, conditions for attaining those outcomes, and events of instruction that seek to engage learners and transfer knowledge. We also see cognitivism in the taxonomies such as Bloom's taxonomy of cognitive outcomes and the later versions, which we saw in this week's reading. These taxonomies help to classify educational goals, objectives, standards, and enhance communication about the courses and learning. As we saw in the reading, critics of Bloom's taxonomy claim that the learning may not always be hierarchical as he broke it out, and critics of other cognitive learning theories claim that some cognitive structures may not allow for cultural differences, which can impact the learning. Taking us back to the idea of social context, the social cognitive theory draws from both behaviorism and cognitive theory. This theory stresses the importance of context and the social aspect of learning. For example, culture plays a key part in learning, giving context to the lesson. A learner may engage in lessons about history better when they can relate their own experience or that of people that they know.